conflicts, and this increase over the last 3 decades has been threefold. What we want is a banning of weapons that can operate without any human control. Our neutrality is not at disposal.
The former President Trump stated that he can end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours.
パレスチナ自治区ガザやウクライナなど世界各地で紛争が絶えない中、紛争をするどちらの側にもつかず戦地で人権などを守る活動をするのが ICRC 赤十字国際委員会。1863年創設。国際人道法に基づき戦争・内戦などの犠牲者に対し最前線で人道支援を行う国際組織です。ガザでも15年以上医療支援を続けてきました。5月には戦闘激化に合わせ野外病院を開設。中立の立場で紛争当事者とも直接対話し、ハマスに捕らわれた人質の解放でも引き渡しの支援を行いました。ただ前線には危険も。6月にはガザ事務所が爆撃の被害に。敷地周辺にいた22人が亡くなりました。その赤十字国際委員会のスポリアリッチ総裁がテレビ東京などの取材に応じました。現在の紛争の現場での課題や将来人工知能 AI などが戦争に使われる危険性、さらには中立の立場がゆえに戦争を起こした側に加担しているように批判されることへの反論などを答えました。
75 years of the Geneva Convention is per se a success because all states ratified the conventions and all states still adhere to the Geneva Conventions as a principle. But what we have seen over the last 30 years is an increase of international and non-international armed conflicts, and this increase over the last 3 decades has been threefold. What we see is exponential numbers of civilian victims that should not happen in situations of conflict. So we have to do more to implement the spirit and the letter of the Geneva Conventions, and hence my call today on all states and state leaders to make the implementation of international humanitarian law their priority. But in the face of new technologies, of artificial intelligence and the means that these new technologies bring to warfare, we need states to come together and mitigate some of the negative impacts that can arise from these possibilities supporting warfare. What we want to avoid is that humans lose control over the application of weapons, but this control, with the inclusion of artificial intelligence and algorithms, can easily be lost. As we commemorate Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we should be aware that new technologies have the potential to have similar effects on the civilian population once employed, as we have seen with nuclear weapons in the past. What we want is a banning of weapons that can operate without any human control. We also have to make sure that humans are at all stages in the employment of a weapon fully mastering who's targeted and who's not.
So the next question is about regarding Ukraine. Yeah, so there's some attacks on civilians and infrastructures by mainly Russian troops, which are prohibited by international humanitarian law in the world. So can you say clearly that this is a violation for the...
We do not substantiate violations in public. We do not comment on military operations and the conduct of hostilities in public, but we do address it with the parties to a conflict. And what I can say publicly is that we ask the parties to uphold IHL, compliance with IHL, international humanitarian law, to do their utmost to protect civilians and civilian infrastructure at all time.
I understand your position, your stance, but actually, the ICRC was criticized when you had a meeting with Russia about the war in Ukraine. How do you understand this opinion?
We are a neutral, independent, and impartial organization. We have a clear mandate to visit prisoners of war and to be granted access to prisoners of war on both sides. Just to give you an example, in order to do that, it is required that we have a close cooperation with both sides. I will travel to Moscow again as I traveled to Ukraine and to Moscow in the past. It is necessary for us to fulfill our role and to be able to implement our mandate. Our neutrality is not at disposal. We are criticized for it in public, but for us, it's a means to operate, and it's a conditio sine qua non, so to say. It's our ticket to operate. If we renounce on it, we will never have access to prisons around the world and have the trust to work with detention authorities, because mainly why detention facilities work with us and detention authorities work with us in 100 situations of conflict is because we are confidential and discreet about it.
As for Ukraine, so in the US, the former President Trump stated that he can end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours if he becomes president. So, but I assume it is not so easy to stop the war. So, what do you think about this type of announcement?
Ending wars requires negotiations, and we call on all states to promote peace negotiations, and we call on all those who have influence on the parties to conflict to exercise this influence, to bring the parties to the table so that, their agreements can help us conduct our work. Without political agreements, the humanitarian situation is unlikely to substantively improve in the future, no matter which conflict you talk about. It requires negotiations, and it requires negotiations between the parties, either directly or facilitated by thirds.
Regarding Gaza, so when you visited Gaza and Israel last year, you described this conflict as a moral failure of international community and international society. Could you describe the current situation again? And one more thing, so how do you feel about the murder of Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of Hamas? I had a meeting with, will this murder affect the peace negotiation or not?
When I was in Gaza, it's true, I spoke of a moral failure of the international community, and I can repeat this today because since I was in Gaza in December, the situation has deteriorated in drastic ways.